Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is October 22nd, 2024, Tuesday, October 22nd, 2024, in the home stretch to Halloween. So, what better time than to listen and look at some Eerie News? First story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled Invoking Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary has been invoked by many names: Mary Worth, Hail Mary, Mary White, or Mary Jane. However, the fate of all those who call upon her have always been terrible indeed. Identified as an evil spirit, her tale emerged from British folklore in the 1700s and took on a new vengeful twist with the advent of the internet in the 1990s. Invoking Bloody Mary by one person or group is done by chanting her name into a mirror placed in a dimly lit room. Her name must be called 13 times, and her apparition will appear looking like a bloody corpse, a witch, or a ghost that could either be friendly or demonic. Bloody Mary is said to scream, curse, scratch out eyes, strangle, or steal the participant's soul. One of the variants of this urban myth is Mary Worth. This reference dates back to 1970, when there was a magical tale making the rounds at parties. The story was about a witch named Mary Worth who was burned at the stake after accusations of witchcraft were levied against her. This supposedly happened around the time of the Salem witch trials. The idea was to go into a darkened room by yourself with a single candle, and that if you stared into a mirror and said, "Mary Worth," 13 times she would appear in the reflection. What is doubtful about this tale being accurate is that persons accused of witchcraft in the United States were never burned. They were hung. There is a historical figure of Queen Mary Tudor I, daughter of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. She received the moniker of Bloody Mary due to executions carried out under her 5-year reign in which she tried to return England to Catholicism again. In truth, her father's reign was bloodier, including the execution of 2 of his queens. But considering that Protestants ran the country, from then on efforts were made to describe her this way and smear her image as much as possible. Fast forward to modern times, when during the 1990s chain letters began circulating online via emails describing how the ghost of Mary kills anyone who summons her. In other versions, she merely scares the wits out of them. The following was one of the first to appear online in 1994. Quote, "When I was about 9 years old, I went to a friend's for a birthday/slumber party. There were about 10 other girls there. About midnight, we decided to play Mary Worth. Some of us had never heard of this, so one of the girls told a story. Mary Worth lived a long time ago. She was a very beautiful young girl. One day she had a terrible accident that left her face so disfigured that nobody would look at her. She had not been allowed to see her own reflection after this accident for fear that she would lose her mind. Before this, she had spent long hours admiring her beauty in her bedroom mirror. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, unable to fight the curiosity any longer, she crept into a room that had a mirror. As soon as she saw her face, she broke down into terrible screams and sobs. It was at this moment that she was so heartbroken and wanted her old reflection back. She walked into the mirror to find it, vowing to disfigure anybody that came looking for her in the mirror. After hearing this story, which was told very scarily, we decided to turn out all the lights and try it. We all huddled around the mirror and started repeating, 'Mary Worth, Mary Worth. I believe in Mary Worth.' Well, at the 7th time we said it, one of the girls that was in front of the mirror started screaming and trying to push her way back away from the mirror. She was screaming so loud that my friend's mom came running into the room. She had quickly turned on the lights and found this girl huddled in the corner screaming. She turned around to see what the problem was and saw these long fingernail scratches running down her right cheek. I will never forget her face as long as I live." End quote. During the early 1960s, Bloody Mary emerged as an adolescent party game where a ghost haunts a mirror. The connection between this phantom, the British queen with the same name, Mary Worth of comic strip fame, and Mary Worth of legend is unknown. Folklorist Alan Dunes suggests the game of Bloody Mary is a metaphor for puberty in girls. Others point to an overactive imagination as the origin. Nominal realism is the term used by developmental psychologist Jean Piaget, which is found in folklore about the magical properties of mirrors. This dates back to ancient times. An example of this is a superstition of 7 years bad luck if a mirror is broken. Scrying into a mirror is supposed to allow the person to see the future. In the Bible, 1 Corinthians 13 as seeing through a glass darkly, looking glass divination is mentioned in Chaucer's Squire's Tales written in 1390, Spenser's The Fairy Queen from 1590, and Shakespeare's Macbeth from 1606, among others. Another version of this was when a young woman would walk up a flight of stairs backward while holding a handle and a hand mirror inside a darkened house. Gazing into the mirror, they would see one of two visions, either the face of their future husband or a skull indicating they would die before marrying. In some Halloween cards, there is a shadow in the background with the outline of a witch with her pointy hat and broom, suggesting that this act of looking into a mirror is witchcraft. Scottish poet Robert Burns wrote in 1787 of how standing before a mirror, eating an apple, and holding a candlestick will invoke a spirit. This is similar to the fairy tale of Snow White, written by the brothers Grimm and published in 1812. Snow White's stepmother is beautiful and practices witchcraft. Her prized possession is a magic mirror, which she asks every morning, looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all? She is always the one named by the mirror, which is unable to lie. Then one day, when her stepdaughter is 7 years old, the mirror names Snow White as the fairest in the land. The queen, who is enthralled to the mirror and her own vanity, orders the murder of a child by her huntsman. She orders him to bring her heart as proof she is dead, and also to eat it. The mirror is the one to inform the queen that Snow White is not dead, and also where to find her. It's not a stretch to see that whatever spirit inhabits the mirror is quite evil. In 1883, a book of folklore described the fallacy of vanity and the use of a mirror. Quote, "When a boy, one of my aunts who lived in Newcastle on Tyne used to tell me of a certain girl that she knew who was very vain and fond of standing before the looking-glass admiring herself. One night, as she stood gazing low, all of her ringlets were covered with dripping sulfur, and the devil appeared peeping over her shoulder." End quote. Another connection to the Bloody Mary myth is an American newspaper soap opera-style strip named Mary Worth. That was a spin-off from an older comic strip, Apple Mary, which dates from 1934 and features the character Apple Mary Worth. This comic ran for 80 years and dealt with subjects dear to a young woman's heart, such as romance and marriage. There's also the character Bloody Mary from Tales of the South Pacific. This was in 1946, written by James Michener, which was made into a musical in 1949 and a film in 1958. She is a Vietnamese woman brought to the island by a French planter. She was a bootlegger who traded with Marines during World War II. The reason for her name was her mouth appeared to be bloody, since she chewed on betel nuts. Some say the character was a composite of real people. However, it's said the real Bloody Mary lived on the island of Espiritu Santo for years after the end of the war and died at the ripe age of 102. Using a mirror for scrying goes back to ancient times. The witches of Thessaly, who date as far back as 8 BC, would use polished surfaces called speculari to scry into the past or future, and would then write their predictions in blood. Another superstition is that mirrors should be covered or turned to the wall when someone in the household has died. This is said to signify an end to all vanity, as well as respect for the dead. There's also belief the soul of the departed can be trapped in it. This was practiced across the world, including in England, Scotland, America, China, Madagascar, the Crimea, and Bombay. Other cultures believe the mirror will reflect the shadow soul, or the real nature of the person. Perhaps this is why vampires are described as not casting a reflection in one. In 2010, a study was carried out by Dr. Caputo of the University of Urbino, in which the participants were asked to stare into a mirror for 10 minutes with dim lighting around them. The results were a deformity in their face, 66%, a monstrous face, 48%, an unknown person, 28%, an archetypal face, 28%, a face of a parent or relative, 18%, and an animal face, 18%. There's another spirit known as Bloody Mary as well, which is made of a jigger of vodka, 3-ounce tomato juice, half-ounce fresh lemon juice, 4 drops Worcestershire, 1 dash salt, 1 dash pepper, shake well with cracked ice, and serve. I like this last Bloody Mary the best of all. So yeah, I don't think it's so much the mirror, it's the vanity. Like overstaring, that's I think when you run into problems. But anyway, and I'm looking at this and why would you want to invoke Bloody Mary? I don't see an upside to anything there. It's getting the wits scared out of you. Next story is also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, and it's titled The Terrible Haunting of a French Château. The Château de Noyer du Tourneau, located in Normandy, France, was known to be haunted by a white lady that walked the grounds and a werewolf that stalked the peasants in the vicinity. However, between October 1867 and January 1877, the terror that made itself known had no parallel. The chateau was built in 1835 on the site of the medieval Castle Noyer that dated back to the 14th century and was less than a mile south of the chateau. The older structure was razed by a fire, and the de Baudre family decided to build a new home using the stones from the original one. The de Baudre family ended without direct descendants, and the chateau was inherited in 1867 by a close branch of the family. The new owners were Ferdinand Lescaudet de Manville, his wife Pauline de Coucy, and their son Maurice. When the family moved to the chateau, with them came Emile the coachman, Auguste the gardener, Selina de Bisson the cook, Amelina the maid, and Abbe Drouvassal, Maurice's tutor. The first 3 years of their stay, they witnessed strange events like doors slamming for no reason, moving objects, and odd noises. Monsieur de Manville initially believed the strange events were a result of malice against the family, and therefore of human origin. Once a strange noise was heard, he would gather all the household into one room to make sure they were all accounted for. He bought guard dogs and he organized surveillance rounds with his servants. He also set traps, but ultimately they turned out to be useless. He noted, quote, "When the noises occurred while the ground was covered with snow, there was no trace of footsteps around the castle. I've secretly stretched wires to all openings. They have never been broken." End quote. Suddenly, all the peculiarity stopped and stayed that way for 5 years. In October 1875, the events returned and started to escalate. Monsieur de Manville started to keep a diary of all the disturbances, even those his friends witnessed. Clergy that was brought in to help also saw the strange phenomena. Ferdinand de Manville began a newspaper that he filled every morning after the events of the previous night. One of the entries was the following, quote, "January 17th, 11 p.m. Woken by what sounded like a body falling in the first floor corridor, followed by a heavy ball that rolls along the corridor to strike loudly on the door of the green room. 20 sharp rapping sounds, then 18 coming from inside the green room. At 11:35, 5 blows on the door of the green room. 15 loud thumping noises going up the stairs to the second floor. 2 gunshots. Footless legs walk 10 paces up the stairs to the second floor as the building seems to shake. At 15 minutes past midnight, 8 strong blows on the first floor landing, 3 on the second." End quote. Bangs would be heard coming from a far-off room, followed by unintelligible shouting. Then the noise would become louder and louder. On October 13, 1875, Abbe the tutor came to Monsieur and Madame de Manville, saying he had seen a chair in his room move by itself. Monsieur de Manville went to the room, used gum paper to stick the chair in a certain position, and left. Later that night, the tutor started to ring a bell he had in his room to signal something had happened. When Monsieur de Manville arrived, the poor man was huddled in his bed with his covers pulled up. The chair had been moved to another part of the room, and ornaments and a candlestick were toppled over. The tutor told him the sharp rapping started to sound out in the room. As they spoke, loud thumps came from around the chateau, as if from every corner. De Manville, along with the servants which he had armed, pursued the slowly fading sounds. Every room they opened was unoccupied. There were other times when furniture would be moved inside a room to block a door from being opened. It seemed that whatever haunted that chateau was also a mimic, since several times the servants heard what sounded like the voices and the steps of the de Manvilles, only to find they were not in the structure. Starting that night, the household was terrorized by the sound of a fist banging on windows and door. A huge but unseen object would be heard rolling down the stairs. The parish priest was summoned, and he decided to stay for the night. In the pre-dawn hours, Heavy footsteps, like a stomping giant, echoed down the main staircase. The priests needed no convincing to believe that a supernatural event was taking place. All the activity intensified on Halloween night, and sounds of wails, shouts, and thumps kept the household on the edge of their seats until 3 a.m. Another who kept a journal was the cook Selina de Bisson, who detailed the phenomena. After the de Manville family sold the chateau, she stayed and married a local man. The diary is currently kept by her descendant, Didier Duchemin, the mayor of the town Le Tourneau. This is an entry dating to 1875. Quote, night of Thursday, December 30th, 1875 at, I guess this is 12:40 a.m. 3 blows struck slowly on the door of the green room. 8 deft blows at the top. Everything trembles. Long walk in the corridor of the second. The steps are sometimes fast, sometimes slow. These steps do not sound anything human, nor no animal can climb like this. Following blows in the vestibule in the corridor on the second floor, we hear screams like bellowing at the height of the windows. On January 19th, 1876, I guess this would be 1:15 a.m., I was awakened by a gallopade upstairs from above. The windows shook for 10 minutes. There were knocks on the doors. End quote. The disturbances would originate mostly in the green room, called thus because of the color of the walls. It was located on the first floor on the left when looking at the front facade. The house also included a red room and a blue room. Then during a terrible storm, screaming accompanied the loud knocking. The din would increase until the voice of a distressed woman calling for help would fill every corner of the building. The next day, the wailing woman's voice was inside the chateau. Her whimpering and shrieks chilled the blood. But the worst was knowing they didn't come from a flesh and blood woman. The night after this, the cries came from inside the locked green room. By now, the household knew better than to investigate the shrill sobbing. The tutor seemed to be the target of quiet horrors. In his room, his belongings would be moved around, as were his clothing and furnishings. Once a chair was found on top of the table. The window in his room would fly open, despite being nailed down. Once all his books were thrown to the floor except the Bible. There were nights that whatever walked the halls of the chateau knocked on each door as if asking to be let in, but always more at the tutor's room. Then the thumping resumed inside the green room. Once Madame de Manville was unlocking a door when the key was ripped from her fingers and then struck the back of her hand, leaving a large bruise. The bishop sent a canon whose presence calmed the poltergeist activity, but only for a while. A few days later it started up again, but worse than before. One day an unseen force went into Emile and Auguste's room and threw around their belongings after overturning their beds. The next target was Monsieur de Manville's study, where his books and papers were scattered on the floor. The woman's screams were now accompanied by growling from an unknown animal and the bellow of a bull. A pulse-like tapping moved along the corridor and came to Maurice de Manville's room, where his door was hit so hard every window in the structure shook. The Catholic Church finally agreed to conduct the rites of exorcism and having a novena to be said at Lourdes at the same time. On January 26, 1876, the parish priest came to Château de Noyer-de-Tourneur. Upon its arrival, an unearthly scream sounded out, accompanied by the sound of stampeding animals. Then the noise of heavy furniture being dragged around echoed out. This was followed by the door to Maurice's room shaking violently. The rite of exorcism reached its peak at 11:15 p.m. The agonizing growls of an animal in its death throes resounded between the walls. The green room was filled with furious thumps, and a man's voice shouted up from the first floor. Then silence enveloped the house. The priest slumped in his chair, and in a huddle the servants went from room to room. Nothing strange was found. All was quiet for a few days. Then Madame de Manville, while writing at her desk, had holy medals and crosses materialize out of nowhere and fall across the letters. Months followed with no activity, but the peace ended in August, when quiet but unmistakable tapping started to sound out in odd corners of the chateau. The next month the drawing-room furniture was dragged around into a horseshoe shape. Monsieur de Manville was away on business when his wife saw the bolt of her bedroom move back by itself. In another room, an organ played by itself. and the furniture in the room of Maurice's new tutor was rearranged. The occurrences never intensified to the degree the family had previously experienced. Much of the activity lessened, but the exhausted family moved out in 1877 and then sold the property. In 1884, the chateau was acquired by a Mr. Decaine, described as enigmatic, a Freemason, a Rosicrucian, and a student of occultism. He kept a mobile attraction, which was the carcass of a whale, and was known to be unkind to those who worked for him. The Château de Noyer remained unoccupied until the early 1980s. The mystery persists as to the origins or cause for these hellish manifestations. Some spoke of a lady belonging to the de Noyer family who lived in the old castle at the beginning of the 19th century. It was said she was selfish and vain, and after death, the gates of paradise refused to open for her. So she wandered every night around the house that once occupied the land of her one-time home. Like the de Manville, the occupants of the chateau asked for intercession from the Catholic Church. A blessing drove her outside the home, which is why she was seen walking through the grounds. This, however, does not explain what would rampage throughout the chateau of Calvados. There are still stories of a woman's head appearing at a window. Some believe the stones of the ancient chateau used for the construction of the present building transmitted a curse. Perhaps it was a product of public execution at town square or deaths from the plague. The area itself has a terrible legend of a furious beast, a predator who devoured over 24 people in the Singles forest in 1632. It was known as the Bête de Sangles, or the Bête d'Evreux. These products predate the attacks of the beast of Gévaudan between 1764 and 1767. The people of the area believed that what preyed on the villagers was a human who changed into a wolf. Priests tried to enlist the help of neighboring parishes, but the townspeople were so traumatized that they had very few volunteers to take part in the hunt. The hunters themselves refused to go deep into the woods unless they were in a large group. In 1633, it was reported that an animal larger than a wolf was killed after a hunting party organized by the Count de la Suze poured over 5,000 hunters and beaters into the area. The wolf was red in color, with a pointed tail and a wider rump than a normal wolf. By then it had claimed 30 victims. The Singles wood extended over 3,700 acres on the edge of the Orne Valley. A report in the Gazette from March 19, 1632 read, quote, "Since last month in the forest of Singles, and then between there and Falais, people have seen a wild beast that has already devoured 15 people. Those who have avoided his fangs report that this savage beast is similar to a large mastiff of such a speed that it will be impossible to run and catch him on foot. He is of such extraordinary agility that people have seen him jump right over the river in certain places. Some people call him Thorend. Local residents and forest gamekeepers have shot at him from range with arquebuses on several occasions, but without wounding him. They do not dare approach him, or even to reveal themselves, until they are organized in a large group, exactly as they will be today when they hear the sound of the alarm bell, to which all the parishioners from all the parishes around have been invited by their village priests, as 3,000 people are assembled to carry out the hunt." End quote. One of those who came to investigate the haunting was Camille Flammarion, an astronomer, author, and theosophist. He investigated paranormal events and spiritism from a scientific angle for over 60 years. In a presentation to the Society for Psychical Research in October 1923, he said he believed in telepathy, etheric doubles, the stone tape theory, and rarely the dead do manifest in hauntings. By 1924, a year prior to his death, he published his book Les Maisons Hantées, or The Haunted Houses, in which he concluded that only in rare cases were hauntings caused by the souls of the departed, but mostly they were a result of the remote action of the psychic force of a living person. I would interpret that as a poltergeist, but anyway. Harry Houdini reviewed the book and remarked, quote, "It fails to supply adequate proof of the veracity of the conglomeration of hearsay it contains. It must, therefore, be a collection of myths." End quote. In 1984, a fire of unknown origin damaged the building all except the green room. Present day it sits quiet and lonely, deep in the Orne down an inconsequential track. Now, if you want to go to strangerthanfictionstories.com, I do have a the translated account of the investigators who came to the chateau and interviewed the family years after they left, and also about different letters. This is like in the 1890s, 1880s, by M.G. Morris. Okay, and it takes in 1891, and basically it gives like a detailed account of, I guess, when the Manvilles were there. Well, not only their cook, but Monsieur de Manville kept pretty good accounting of what was happening. And one of the things that I found interesting, which I haven't been able to find the reference to, is the couple, as far as it's known, they had only one son, Maurice. And Monsieur de Monville died in 1918 and his wife in 1933. However, their son, Maurice, died in 1895 at the age of 29, I believe. And you cannot find any reference to what happened to Maurice. Like, what did he die from? He was 29. His parents outlived him. All right. And the reason why I think about it is, yes, this went beyond a simple poltergeist-like manifestations. But you also have to think, was he the target? Was his tutor the target? I mean, what was going on there? And unfortunately, was this going on before they even came to live there? Because remember, everyone had died. They took over. They took that house because everyone had left. There was nobody left to take over that property. So there was no old family to ask, did you guys experience this? I guess that will never be answered. Our next story is, we are back to Stranger Than Fiction stories. And this one is titled The Tooth Fairy's Stash Found. Construction workers are used to finding unusual things in the walls of older buildings. But in Valdosta, Georgia, they were dumbfounded when a stash of hundreds of human teeth were found buried inside of a second-floor wall, which was cracked during renovations. 4 days before Halloween 2018, the Converse building in downtown Valdosta was under renovation as a commercial space, when construction crew members cracked open a wall and stood back when what appeared to be hundreds of human teeth spilled out of the hole. The building was constructed in 1900, and one of the first tenants was Dr. Clarence Whittington, a dentist. In 1911, another dentist, Dr. Lester G. Yeomans, rented space there until at least 1930. The same year, Dr. W.C. Posey opened a new office over Vincent's drugstore. The first floor of the building was originally occupied by Vincent and Barnes drugstore, so it's understood the dental office was on the second floor where the teeth were found. What's even more unusual is that two other Georgia cities, Greensboro and Carrollton, have buildings where human teeth were found in the walls. In 2000, the old Western Auto building in Cadiz, Kentucky, was being renovated and converted to Cadiz City Hall. The structure dated back to the Civil War. The interior walls were stripped and cleaned out, and just like the discovery in 2018, behind a wall on the second floor, a worker found hundreds of human teeth. No one could figure out how or why teeth would have been stored inside the wall. Contact with a local historical society provided a hint. Dr. Bernard Hale operated a dental office in the building in the late 1920s and early 1930s. Considering the size of a tooth, one would think there would be no trouble in disposing of them even 100 years ago. Though the myth of the tooth fairy is well known in the United States, this usually involves human baby teeth that a child leaves under their pillow in exchange for money. However, most of the teeth did not belong to children. Certain occult practices such as hoodoo use adult human teeth in rituals, fetishes, or mojo bags to symbolize biting or obtaining things by force. They are even used as lucky pieces for divination. The mystery still remains as to why anyone, especially a dentist, would decide to hoard hundreds of human teeth behind the wall of their office. In a strange twist, in 1984, J. W. Vincent, whose family had owned the Vincent drugstore located in the Converse building, was beaten and strangled to death by a 19-year-old man. Police said there was no evidence of robbery or that Vincent had encountered an intruder. His body was found in a bedroom of his Railroad Street home. He was a bachelor and lived alone. His sister was the one who found him. He had continued in the family business and worked as a pharmacist at the store until 1981 and had sold the business to a cousin. He was a popular figure in Byron, known for helping disadvantaged teenagers. John William Barnes, who was accused of killing Vincent, had once lived with Vincent and was unemployed when he was arrested. Law enforcement officials had little to say about the murder, citing a lack of evidence to establish a motive. Even stranger was that after the initial report of the crime, no other mention was made of what happened to the man accused of the murder, what the motive was, if any, and the outcome of the autopsy. Considering that the victim was a well-known resident of the town, it seemed an odd aspect that everything was shut down. So, I mean, this little place, Valdosta, I've been to Valdosta, and I don't know, hundreds of teeth behind a wall. You would think that how many teeth could a dentist have extracted? You put them in the trash and they go out. It's like very. But see, what happened was in this building known in Valdosta as the Converse building, the drugstore occupied the first floor, and then the dental offices or offices were being rented out on the second floor. And I'm sure there were, these first dentists that went in there around right after it was opened and during the 1920s and 30s and everything. I'm sure there were other office rentals, but at least maybe dentists. But again, it's like what they were all putting their teeth back there. And for those of you looking at the video, I'm opening up this picture. As you can see, the majority of these teeth are adult teeth. In other words, they're teeth with roots. This is not a child's tooth. Which again, why would you send a child to a dentist for an extraction of baby teeth? They just fall out. So that's a very strange. And then there's the other one in Kentucky that was the same situation. A dentist, instead of disposing of the teeth on a daily basis, okay, let's say you pull 10 teeth in a day. I don't know. You put them in the trash and they go out with your regular trash. Instead, they're being thrown into a space between your walls. That's got to be one of the most strangest, unusual, and unexplainable. Like, why would anyone do that? Unless there's some type of occult, and I'm not even sure about that, occult dentist. I don't know. Why would you want to do that? So there you go. That's my, to me, when I read that, I was like, what in the world is that? Anyway, next story is out of Fox News. This is titled, Archaeologists Uncover One of the World's Oldest Christian Churches. All right, archaeologists recently uncovered what they believe to be one of the oldest Christian churches in the world. The University of Munster announced the discovery of the 4th century church in a press release on October 11th. The school, which is located in Germany, teamed up with archaeologists from the National Academy of Sciences of Armenia to find the ancient ruins. The remains of the ancient Christian building were found at the Artaxata site in the Ararat Plain. Excavators have been digging there since 2018 but didn't find the remains until recently. The find consists of an octagonal building with cruciform extensions. The University of Munster explained. The team excavated parts of the church and studied it using geophysical methods. Typologically, the find corresponds to early Christian memorial buildings. The press release continued. In the cross-shaped extensions, the researchers discovered the remains of wooden platforms which were radiocarbon, dated to the mid-4th century AD. The oldest Christian church buildings date back to the 3rd and 4th centuries. The octagonal church at Artaxata, God, that's hard, had a floor made of mortar and terracotta tiles and measured around 100 feet in diameter. There were also some fragments of marble imported from the Mediterranean, which indicate the church was lavishly decorated, experts say. The 4th century building is the oldest archaeologically documented church in the country. Sensational evidence for early Christianity in Armenia, University of Munster professor Achim Leitenberger said in a statement. The find is fitting in Armenia, which the University of Munster says was the first Christian state ever established. According to legend, Gregory the Illuminator converted the Armenian king Tiridates III to Christianity in Artaxata in 301 AD, making Armenia the first Christian state in the world, the school explained. The medieval monastery of Khor-Virap, just a stone's throw from the now discovered church, is a reminder of this tradition. Artaxata served as the capital of the Kingdom of Armenia, ruled by the Artaxiad and Aracid dynasties. The press release added, the city developed into an important metropolis in the Hellenistic period and was the capital of the Kingdom of Armenia for almost 6 centuries. Wow, there you go. So, it seems like, and let me tell you something, considering when you look, let me see if we could play this video on it that shows. Basically, it's just, as you can see, for those listening to the podcast version of it, it's a nonverbal video with music by using muon radiography, located in the ancient Russian city of Derbent on the Caspian Sea. I guess this is different methods that they're using now to what they call muon radiography, and this is how they're finding, I guess, oldest Christian churches in the world. Or obviously these are buildings that have just disappeared from the surface in some instances, because just of time. We're looking at almost 2,000 years, and it's incredible to think that you look at some of these structures that they are almost 2,000 years old, and they're still standing and erect, and some have walls, some have arches, doorways. It's incredible. And again, what they're showing is that the building is in the shape of a cross that reinforces the belief that it was a Christian church. And of course, this is the kind of excavation that probably will take a long time. And of course, who knows what else they'll find in there as they keep excavating. But like what they say, they have to be careful going in there, because sometimes some of these locations are a little bit unsafe as far as for the archaeologists. So there you go. And that's what we have today in Eerie News. But do not fear, because there's always more Eerie News that will come out. As a matter of fact, probably as we speak, and I will bring it to you. Till next time. Take care.